If you're able, we're in Exodus 34. Making our way through. Hear the word of the Lord from Exodus 34 this morning. The Lord said to Moses, "Cut for yourself 2 tablets of stone like the first, and I will write on the tablets the words that were on in the first tablets, which you broke." Excuse me. "Be ready by the morning and come up in the morning to Mount Sinai and present yourself there to me on the top of the mountain. No one shall come up with you, and let no one be seen throughout all the mountain. Let no flocks or herds graze up opposite that mountain." So Moses cut 2 tablets of stone like the first, and he rose early in the morning and went up on Mount Sinai as the Lord had commanded him. And he took in his hand 2 tablets of stone. The Lord descended in the cloud, and he stood with him there. And he proclaimed the name of the Lord. The Lord passed before him, and he proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping his steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgressions and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the 3rd and 4th generation. And Moses quickly bowed his head toward the earth and worshiped. And he said, "If now I have found favor in your sight, O Lord, please let the Lord go in the midst of us. For it is a stiff-necked people. And pardon our iniquity and our sin, and take us for your inheritance." This is the word of the Lord. You may be seated. I was going to read the whole chapter, but I don't think I could get through it right now. In just a bit, as I mentioned, after our gathering here, after our family meal downstairs, we're going to have a member meeting. You see, our church fiscal year runs July to June, so we're coming up on the end of the year, and so we're going to be talking about our plans, our budget. And that discussion that we're going to have together, I've outlined into 3 kind of phrases, 3 things that I hope to talk a lot about this year, 3 things that if somebody were to ask you, what's Veritas all about? You know, you'd have something really easy and concrete to remember. It can kind of be boiled down into this single sentence. And it's actually on our West Veritas website right now. If you go to our website, pick our congregation, it's there as well. It's this: at Veritas West, we are followers of Jesus who are part of a family of disciples who are passionately for our neighborhood. So we're followers of Jesus, we're family of disciples, and we are for our neighborhood. You see, the way that Jesus demonstrated his love, that he was passionately for us and not against us, was he moved into our earthly neighborhood from his heavenly home. He was present here. He served. He was caring. And then he met our greatest need, providing a way of salvation from sin and death so that we could be welcomed into his family. There's this kind of phrase we want to think about all of this year and keep this kind of evangelistic mission in front of us, is that we want to be welcoming neighbors into our family, moving neighbors into our family. In very practical and intentional ways this year, we want to follow Jesus in ways that love our neighbors, right? The way he loved us, so that they can be welcomed into this incredible family of God that he has called us to be. And I'm excited to talk a lot about that this afternoon with you all. But today's passage actually gives us an amazing picture of why this is possible. That seems very hard to imagine how we can do that. But here in this passage, we see our motivation, the power that we have to accomplish this mission, and our hope that it will happen right? That we will be a distinct people gathered as a family, doing weird things. Not weird like awkward, but just weird because nobody else does the things that the church often does. The way we love the world, the way God has loved us. Our motivation, our power, our hope has everything to do with the gospel of Jesus Christ. In Exodus here, as we get into 34, it seems the whole book seems to kind of be building to this chapter today. When most people think of Exodus, they probably don't think of chapter 34, though, right? You often think of Moses and the basket. You think of the plagues that happened all over Egypt, right? Frogs kind of taking over a city is kind of hard to forget. You may think of the Passover meal or God parting the Red Sea. You might think of the Ten Commandments, the great scenes at Mount Sinai, but my guess is very few recall this passage in Exodus 34. Yet it seems kind of a climax in this story, and it's more powerful. It's more relevant and important for us today than probably any of those other things. Bloody rivers, frogs, boils, water highways. Today's message is incredibly relevant for us today. Because listen, it answers a question that I think we wrestle with every single day, a reality that we really struggle with if we're honest. It's probably the feeling that you got in your belly as I started to talk about cultivating an evangelistic vision of ministry this year. Wait, you want us to know our neighbors? Like talk to them? Get to know them, get to know their stories, their interests, the pain in their story, where that's all coming from. You want us to celebrate their birthdays and anniversaries and mourn with them at funerals, give them our phone number. That sounds terrifying. Why is it terrifying? Have you ever thought about that? You're probably like, yeah, I could name numerous reasons of why loving my neighbor, knowing them is terrifying. And if that's you, listen, you're not alone, right? You're not alone. To make it even more terrifying, though, I'm not talking about simply the people who live next door to you, right? Or your house, your apartment, right? When Jesus is asked, who is my neighbor? He tells a story of the Good Samaritan who steps into the life of somebody who has just been hurt. He talks about two people who pass by this person who has been hurt. And in this story, he exposes the apathetic, the prejudice, and the self-serving ways that we often practice or live into religion. And Jesus is like, that's not my way. That's not what I'm calling you into. You should love everybody. Anyone, he says in this parable, regardless of an ethnic, religious, socioeconomic status, or whether they love you back or not. Anybody who is like you, anybody who is not like you, to sum it up, anybody that comes across your path is your neighbor. And that just reinforces the terror of it. So we're supposed to love everybody. And it's scary, and I think it's scary not because, we don't want to love people. I think for most of us who are in this room or followers of Jesus, we genuinely want people to experience the love and grace and forgiveness of God. I think it's often terrifying because we think we are so unworthy of the task. We think about how often we have failed to share the love of God with others. We think about how much we relate to those people who pass by on the road and ignore the person on the side of the road. The people who didn't want to be inconvenienced, who were too busy, distracted, who were too concerned with their own interest, who were too worried about what other people thought of them. We start to think about evangelism and loving our neighbors like Jesus, sharing the gospel with them, demonstrating the gospel through acts of renewal and restoration in our community. I think we're terrified often because we're afraid of failure. We know how often we fail, and we're afraid to just live into that, and we're going to fail again. When we share our story, we're afraid that people are going to look down on us or make fun of us or reject us. We're afraid that I might just stumble through this story, like telling the story of the gospel, that I'm not going to get it right when somebody asks. We're afraid to tell people that we're Christian because really we know how sinful we are. We're afraid to be seen as a hypocrite or something. What I want to see in today's passage, though, is our ongoing failure, that thing, that fear that we have of failing. It's not a disqualifier of us living on mission in this world. It's actually part of God's plan. Meaning it's not our impressiveness as a people that other people are convinced of their need for Jesus. It's not in our success that people should be attracted to this family, this church. It's not our strength, our wisdom, our massive budget, our incredible cathedral ceiling. It's not the impressive things that draw people to God. That's what Paul gets at in 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians 2, he says, when I came to you, brothers, I did not come proclaiming to you the testimony of God with lofty speech and wisdom. I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. Listen how he describes himself. When I was with you in weakness. I was fearful and trembling. My speech, they were not in plausible words of wisdom, but in the demonstration of the Spirit, of power, so that your faith, it wouldn't rest on the wisdom of men, but where? In the power of God. If our evangelistic vision for this coming year is empowered by our own strength, our own courage, our own intellect, our impressiveness, we may attract a lot of people, but we will drastically fail the mission of God. Our mission is for people to see his glory through us, that their faith rests on his power, not on ours. That they would know his presence in their life, not ours. Paul says, that happened in you, Corinth. That happened there. But it wasn't in me. I was there in weakness and fear. I was terrified. My word, you didn't really make a lot of sense. I can relate to that as a preacher. I didn't offer lofty wisdom or speech. No. It was through my weakness that you were able to see the power of God. It was through my failures that you saw his faithfulness to you. That's what this passage today is honestly all about. It's a perfect demonstration of it. Our motivation, our power, our hope in welcoming neighbors into our family has nothing to do with our ability. In fact, our ongoing failure is where they see his ongoing faithfulness. Our ongoing failure is where they see his ongoing forgiveness. Through that, they will see his glory. It's kind of what you would call a fail-safe, if you're familiar with the term. In manufacturing, I'm sure other industries, when something goes wrong with a machine, it fails or it breaks down, there's a plan or something in place that kind of shuts the machine down to protect it. Right, to keep the system safe, to prevent further damage or total destruction. Our mission has that kind of fail-safe. Yes, like a machine, we will fail. We will break down. Yes, we will be afraid at times. Yes, there will be not much that's spectacular about us. But there is a plan that in spite of our brokenness and failure, ongoing failure, the mission is safe. The plan is secure. God will receive his glory. In fact, not in spite of our ongoing failure, what we'll see today, it's because of it. Let's see how this plays out in Exodus. I've set it up enough. Now, I sound like a broken record, but as we've studied Israel over the last year, we've seen their ongoing failure over and over. I used to be pretty judgmental of them. Like, after all that he's done for you, how can you just keep complaining? After all that he's shown you, how could you have turned and worshiped this golden calf? But then I remember my own life, how ungrateful I often am, how controlling I can be, even though I've seen his power in my life, how unreliable my faith is, even though he has never been unfaithful to me, how often I sin against him, even in the face of his constant grace and mercy. I'm just like Israel. I think we all are. And so in the face of our ongoing failure, we have the fail-safe of God's faithfulness to his plan to reveal his glory to the world around us through us. To see that, I want to answer 3 questions from this text today. Who is God? Who is God in the face of our ongoing failure? What impact does our failure have on who he is? Who are we in the face of his ongoing faithfulness? Does his faithfulness to us have an impact on our life? And to kind of clean up, we'll answer some of this on the way. But what happens when our ongoing failure is met with his ongoing faithfulness? What happens when those 2 things collide? What is the impact in the world? So the first question, verses 1 through 9, we just read. Who is God in the face of our ongoing failure? Immediately after the people have just failed miserably. Right? They built this idol. God punishes them for it. He doesn't destroy them. He doesn't ignore sin. But he's faithful to his promises. He made a promise to Abraham, their ancestor, that his descendants would inherit the promised land. If he were to completely destroy them, he couldn't fulfill his promise. So he saves a remnant, and he sends them on their way. Go into the land I've promised, but I'm not going with you, we saw last week. And the people are like, you give us the land, you give us everything we desire, but if you don't go with us, we have nothing. So Moses, the mediator, we saw last week, he steps in, and through the effective work of his mediation, God declares, okay, because of my favor, because of my grace, I will go with you. And this truth, Moses is blown away. He's like, God, I want to see your glory. Show me your glory. Show me more of who you are and what you're like. God says, you can't see my face, but I'm going to hide you in a rock. I'm going to get as close as I can. And that's, in chapter 34, that's what's happening. God says, this is what I'm going to do. And now Moses has stepped into the rock, and this is the scene that is unfolding. The glory of God is going to pass by Moses in 1 through 9. He tells Moses to cut these 2 stones, set a perimeter around the mountain, come up to him. And then verse 5, he says, the Lord descends. He stood with him there, and he proclaimed the name of the Lord. So God comes down. In verse 6, he opens up and he passes by Moses just like he said he would. He hides him in the rock. And this is where we see, okay, we expect Moses to tell us, what does God look like? He's passing by you. What does he look like? That's not what Moses records. Moses doesn't record what he looks like. He records what he says. He comes down and he gives a name. His name. And as we've studied this name, it's not just what we call God, but a name in this time, it signifies the fullness of who somebody was. You want to know who I am in spite of your ongoing failure? He says, here it is. Here I am. This is who I am. Verse 6, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love, faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin. You want to know how God can go with Israel into the wilderness, into the promised land in spite of their ongoing failure? Do you want to know how you can have a relationship with God in spite of the fact you continue to sin every day? You continue to disobey him? You continue to fail him? The reason is his name. The reason is in his name. It's who he is. He is a God of steadfast love. And we love this first part in verse 6 in the beginning of 7, don't we? He is full of mercy, it says. To who? To the ruthless and cruel of this world. He is full of grace. Why does he need grace? No, because we've been wicked. We've been wounded. He's slow to anger, it says, because we've wronged him. He is steadfast. He's reliable in his love. because we are unruly and unreliable. Oh, he's full of forgiveness to those who have failed him, hasn't he? He has ongoing forgiveness for those with ongoing failure. It's a beautiful thing. But I stopped halfway through 7. We're left with a tension, aren't we? He says, I'm also a God of justice. But who will by no means, verse 7, clear the guilty? I'm not going to just ignore sin. Visiting the iniquity of the fathers on children and on the children's children to the fourth, third, and fourth generation. Oh, he is a God of steadfast love and mercy and grace. But at the same time, he is also a God of justice, righteousness, and purity. He doesn't just let sin go unpunished. So the tension is, how can he be both? How can he be both gracious and merciful and loving and just, righteous? It's a tension that's really held in balance in the Old Testament, right? We have this sacrificial ceremony where Israel is instructed on how to give sacrifices and atone for their sins. But as the Hebrew writer in the New Testament says in Hebrews 10:3, in these sacrifices, there's just a reminder of the sin every year. It's impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away the sins. So while the Old Covenant and the Old Testament, God is making with Israel a good, and he demonstrates his love and grace, it's only a shadow of his plan. There's this tension. God is loving. He is just. In the Old Testament, it just seems like too heavy of a burden to carry. How can we keep this law? How can we do all of these sacrifices? How can we atone for our sin? Well, it's showing that he is loving and gracious. It's also pointing ahead, isn't it? It's pointing us ahead to Jesus, the better solution. Right? That same Hebrew writer says, but Jesus came in and he offered his life as a sacrifice, a single sacrifice once and for all. He was a better sacrifice. He covered the sins of the whole world once for all. He was a more perfect, acceptable sacrifice. And he says in verse 18, Hebrews 10, where there is forgiveness of these, there's no longer any offering for sin. He completed the sacrificial system. There's no need for more sacrifice. He finished it once and for all. So how can God be both gracious and merciful and just? The solution is Jesus. It's always been Jesus. In Jesus' sacrifice, we get the loving sacrifice, the one who took our punishment. He was just, and he gives us forgiveness, love. He took our punishment, justice, and we get forgiveness, love. Mercy and justice, grace and truth, all of these meet in the death of Jesus Christ on our behalf. This is such an important passage in Exodus that's been building to, because I think so many people look at the Old Testament and you read through and we have such a negative view of God in the Old Testament, as if there were two gods in the Bible, the wrathful and violent and judgmental God in the Old Testament. And then we get to the New Testament, we see Jesus and his love and his grace and his compassion, and we're like, how can these things coexist? But here, I love this passage because here we see he's the same God. Is the same God in the Old and the New Testament. The fullness of who he is, fullness of grace, fullness of love, and also fullness of justice. He doesn't just ignore sin. He is a God who takes care of our sin through sacrifice, and he shows us mercy and grace in the face of our ongoing failure. What does that mean for us? What impact does that have on who we are and how we're to live? In this question, who are we then in face of his ongoing faithfulness? We see, begin in verse 10. My voice is feeling a little bit better, so I'll keep reading verse 10. And he said, behold, I'm making a covenant before all your people. I will do marvels such as have not been created in all the earth or in any nation. And all the people among whom you are shall see the work of the Lord, for it is an awesome thing that I will do with you. Observe what I command you this day. Behold, I will drive out before you the Amorites and the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites and the Hivites, the Jebusites. Take care lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land to which you go, lest it become a snare in your midst. You shall tear down their altars, break their pillars, cut down the Asherim, for you shall worship no other God. For the Lord, whose name is a jealous God, lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land. When they whore after their gods and sacrifice to their gods, and you are invited, eat of the sacrifice. You take of their daughters for your sons and their daughters, whore after their gods, and make your sons whore after their gods. You shall not make for yourself any god of cast metal. See, the rest of this section, he keeps going. He gives all of these commands that he's already given them. Right? He's re-giving them instruction that he's already told Israel. But as you look through there, and I'm not going to read it all, but if you glance through those commands, he's really giving them the commands that mark out their identity in contrast to the other nations, that they are marked out belonging to him and him alone. He says, I'm going to do something through you, Israel, something that the world has never seen. They will marvel at what I'm about to do. I'm going to do a thing that has never been done in all creation. It's an awesome thing, but listen, I'm going to do it with you. With you. He wants to display his ongoing faithfulness to these people who have been nothing but unfaithful to him. He's saying, through you, these unfaithful people, I'm going to receive glory. You'll be a distinct people. And he lists a bunch of things that he wants them to do to show that they belong to him. You know what this kind of reminds me of, this picture? It reminds me of kind of like a wedding scene where people are making a covenant, where they're coming together, they're saying their vows, they're saying, hey, this is the love, these are the things that we're gonna do for one another for the rest of our life. But it's not a normal wedding. It's kind of like if two people who are divorced come back together and get remarried. One of the people in the marriage has been unfaithful or because of decisions has completely wrecked the relationship. I'm not saying God divorced Israel, right? He always keeps his promises to his people. He's always been their God. So maybe more like a renewal, a vow renewal ceremony. But I want to kind of put that picture of a divorced couple coming together to be remarried, to show how devastating of a circumstance this would have been for Israel in this moment. And the beauty and the majesty of his love towards them. When they had shipwrecked their relationship with him, and they pursued another lover, this golden calf. Yet God comes to the altar and he says, I want to renew my commitment to you. I want to have an amazing relationship with you. A loving relationship that is nothing like this world has ever seen. I'm setting you apart as mine so that the rest of the nations can see my demonstration of love towards you. Break down the altars. That's why he said break them down as you go into the land, verse 13 to 16. I don't want you or your children to be tempted by another lover again. Verse 17, I know the temptation is there. So don't make any more golden idols. Remain faithful to me and me alone. You are mine. Keep all the feast and the Sabbath that I have instructed you. All of this will set you apart and will show the nations you belong to me. So who are we in the face of his ongoing faithfulness? We're his. We belong to him. And he invites us in that reality to step into purpose-driven distinction. We don't follow these rules listed here because we're now under the new covenant, not under the old. Jesus has completed all of this, but we are to live distinct as a witness to the world around us. This doesn't mean we're perfect, or even that we're seemingly progressing. I saw a coach that I follow on Instagram says something about it's not about perfection, it's about progress. I was like, that sounds good. But aren't there times where you just don't feel like you're making progress? Sometimes it just feels like you're going backwards. You're continually failing. That begs the question, how? How do we live into this purpose-driven distinction then if we're continually failing? How do we live in the way that shows the glory of God through us if we're continuing to fail and sin and rebel against him? This is an incredible thing about the work of God's faithfulness, isn't it? His love and grace and justice in Jesus Christ in the face of our ongoing failure is how he shows his glory to the world. Who is God in the face of our ongoing failure? The world sees his steadfast love. Who are we in the face of his ongoing faithfulness? We belong to him. They see his commitment to us, even when we are uncommitted to him. What happens when these two things collide, when our ongoing failure is met with his ongoing faithfulness? Oh, this is where we see at the end, God glorifying transformation. Look at verse 29. When Moses comes down from the mountain, Mount Sinai, with the 2 tablets of testimony in his hand, as he came down from the mountain, Moses did not know that the skin of his face shone because he had been talking with God. Aaron and all the people of Israel saw Moses, and behold, the skin of his face shone. They were afraid to come near. After spending time with God, being directed and instructed and having communion and fellowship with God, Moses literally transformed into a glowing witness of the love and grace of God in his life. But why? How? Let me ask you, did this happen because there was something so special about Moses? No. Did it happen because he had finally demonstrated he was worthy of a relationship with God? He was good enough. Was it because God knew that Moses was never going to sin or fail again? No. In fact, one of Moses' greatest failures was about to happen. Such a failure that would prevent him from going into the land of promise with the people. God knew. Moses became a glowing witness to the ongoing faithfulness of God, not because he was anything remarkable. There was anything remarkable about his faith. He was a witness of God's love because of his ongoing failures. In spite of all their incredible rebellion and failures, here was a God who still wanted to spend time with them, transform their life from the inside out, to lead them and love them, to keep his promises to them. And the beauty and wonder of this shines bright because they didn't deserve it. Not because they earned it or deserved it, because they didn't deserve it. They didn't deserve, just like we do not deserve, one single ounce of his glowing illumination of love in our life. Yet Moses just shines bright. Don't miss what's happening here. God is saying, the world is going to see my glory, who I am, my steadfast love through you as a nation, through you as a people. In spite of your ongoing failure, I'm going to demonstrate my ongoing faithfulness. A thing that has never been done so that the world would marvel. And as they step forward and they live free, step into their purpose-driven distinction, they will certainly fail. We'll see it. It's written down for everybody to see. But in all of it, it will shine. We will see the glow, the light of who God is. His incredible love and grace, mercy and forgiveness. So as we step into this year of practical and intentional neighboring, as I began this sermon, praying that many of our neighbors will become family as we follow Jesus and demonstrate his love and service and care for them, we need not go out in fear of failure. We certainly will fail. I'll tell you that right now. We will certainly fail at times. We're going to have organization and plans. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. But we need not trust our own plans, our own ability. We can live on mission and rest assured that in the face of our ongoing failure, God will receive glory through us. He will receive glory in our world, whether we are successful in our own plans or not, whether we are successful in the world's eyes or not, whether we are obedient even or not, whether we fail. Because Jesus was successful for us. Because Jesus was obedient for us. Jesus never failed to live for the glory of God. And he accomplished the thing that the world had never seen before. And it is through him that the love of God shines bright through us. It's through him that God receives the glory that he and he alone deserves. Let's pray. God, we just love you so much. We are just overwhelmed at your goodness and steadfast love towards us. Your ongoing faithfulness and forgiveness towards us in the spite of our ongoing failure, our every best attempt to run from you, to pursue other lovers, idols, things that, God, are about us. Yet over and over and over again in our weakness and failure, in our woundedness and brokenness, you say, come to me. I'll give you rest. You will be my people, and I will be your God, and I will be faithful to you. God, may the world see more of who you are, the beauty of your love and grace and justice through us. Father, we ask that you would empower us to reach our neighbors this year, that more people would be welcomed into this weird family, God, that you have brought together for the purpose of displaying your beautiful, unconditional, unending love. We ask this in Jesus' name.